Ed Mathews joins me here today. You could learn what his team is up to by getting over to clarkstreet.com. That's CLARKST.com. And that's going to be a clickable link in the show notes, of course. We're going to be talking about multifamily investing and flexing into marketing in this round because there's going to be a lot to cover there, especially when you're trying to raise capital for bigger projects. Really appreciate your time, Ed.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Jack.
Great to meet you. Before we get started, let's cover a couple things. First of all, let's talk about clarkstreet.com and what
Sure.
can people expect there? What are you working on and what is your core niche?
So Clark Street Capital helps executives and busy business owners passively invest in real estate. And so that can take multiple forms. These days, it's a lot of multifamily. We're also into single family remodels, flips, as they're called. And we actually have a build to rent project that we're working on right now, as a matter of fact. So it's a lot of different things. We kind of take what the market gives us here in Connecticut and try really hard not to do dumb stuff with our money or our investors' money.
Yeah, well, that's ideal, right?
In a perfect world.
You mentioned that you have quite a bit of Silicon Valley experience, especially in the marketing world. Can you talk a little bit about your background briefly and what you've brought to the real estate world?
So a lot of what I learned, I've worked for, I don't even know how many companies, but I spent about 24 years flying all over the country and in some cases all over the world, slinging software and services for teeny tiny, medium sized, and actually a couple of large Silicon Valley companies. A couple of them you may have heard of. Last one I was with was DocuSign. And I left them right before they went public, actually, in February of 18. I went full-time here at Clark Street. I mean, from a systems perspective, a process perspective, I take what I learned from, working with those teeny tiny companies where I was, employee 6, 7, 8, 30, small companies. And I learned that technology, if used right, is a force multiplier. And so we use technology. I mean, we're a small company. We're 10, 11 people right now. And, we use a whole bunch of technology to allow us to create content and to manage our projects efficiently and run our back office properly and report to our investors and all that elegant way so that it's easy for, a small group of people to run it. The other part of it is from a marketing perspective. I learned that human beings buy from human beings. And so being able to create that relationship here online or in person or both is kind of at the core of what I do from a marketing perspective back in the day in Silicon Valley and even today.
So that actually leads me. Let's start with talking about the marketing and what you're talking
Sure.
about here, because you're raising capital for some fairly big projects. I have to be honest, most people that come on this show that are doing syndications or raising capital for big projects, every single one of them will tell me they're ideal for busy professionals. How do you stand
Sure.
out from the crowd in this world?
Well, I was one, right? So, in terms of being creating that relationship, a lot of it is a lot of my network is folks that I've known for 30 years and then their friends and then their friends' friends. And so that's the way that we've grown. Don't do a lot of public solicitations, to be honest, mainly because I am just as choosy about our investors as they are about me. I like to date before we get married. The reason being is that I really want to understand kind of where a person is in their journey, where they're trying to get, because not all of our projects are a good fit for where our folks want to go. So that once we understand kind of where they are in their journey, that allows me and our team here to be able to sit down with them and say, okay, here are 4 projects that are coming up. I'm going to tell you about all 4, but I don't think the first 2 are necessarily a good fit. And here's why. We'll run through those and then we'll run through the ones that seem to be a good fit and educate them so that they can make a good business decision in their time frame.
I think that's especially interesting. You're not disqualifying them. In fact, if you're still bringing up those other projects, but in some cases, if they raise their hand, maybe it is a good fit. You might have missed something the first time around.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I have plenty of folks that, I have meetings all the time with folks where they're like, oh, I want to get into multifamily. Multifamily is where it's at. Well, Yes and no, right? I mean, it depends on the market. It depends on how well it pencils. It depends on the capital stack and how leveraged you are. It depends on your insurance costs and how friendly the state is and how diverse the economy is. And, so there's a lot of factors in that. Sometimes the best deal is right now we bought a single family house. It's a little bit of a long story, but I'll leave that for later in the show if you want to talk about it. But it turned out that there were 58 acres attached to it. And so we're flipping the house, but the 58 acres is actually turning into a built to rent and multifamily play on top of it. And so, we have investors who have said, okay, the flip makes sense because I want my money back within 12 months. So I'm going to do that. And, we pay a rate for that. And then we have other folks that are saying, okay, I'm willing to invest and know that, that capital is going to be in that project for at least 5 years, and it could be as many as 7 or 10 years, right? Depending on what happens in the world over the next decade.
You mentioned that you initially rely on your network to find those initial investors.
Yep.
However, you also mentioned the amount of automation and some of the marketing tools you're leveraging.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about the communications you've been sending out to nurture and to build that credibility within your network?
So I'm very active on LinkedIn. I like LinkedIn to establish our credibility, to create awareness so that folks can look at us and check us out and they see my connections so they can go backdoor check me and make sure I am who I say I am. And I really like that part of the LinkedIn world. It's how I hired people back in the day, even back in the earlier 2000s, using a tool like LinkedIn. In most cases, it was LinkedIn to figure out, okay, I just met Jack and I'd like to get to know him. Turns out he knows 5 people that I know. Let me pick up the phone and call those folks and say, hey, tell me a little bit about Jack so that I know going into the meeting that, Jack and I are a potential fit. So I like that aspect of LinkedIn, which is why I'm so active on it. The other part of it is that I have some opinions that aren't necessarily popular. I lit the world on fire a little bit last week when I got wind that landlords in California were doubling and tripling their monthly rentals because the demand is so high in the LA area. And I got on and, that's not what we stand for. And the reason that people don't like landlords is exactly for that reason. And I got a little bit of vitriol and a little bit of attaboy. But the fact is that it's, we operate from a value system. I want to help people understand what that is. We are very disciplined in terms of the properties that we chase and the ones that we take down. We have a very specific buy box. We don't deviate from it because it works. I want to expose people that are looking to get to know us to all of that so that by the time we sit down, either on a Zoom call or in person or whatever, and have that cup of coffee, so to speak, they already feel like they know me and are willing to at least have a conversation about what's important to them and where they're trying to go.
Sure. Could you talk a little bit about the tools that you're leveraging to handle some of this marketing? You said you got some systems in place.
Yeah. So internally, we use Slack and ClickUp to handle our internal communications. We use that to handle all of our projects, internal projects, as well as external construction projects. I use a tool called Lemlist to manage our LinkedIn conversations, as well as Taplio, which is a tool that helps with managing our post calendars. We use ClickFunnels for all of our websites and funnels. We use ClickFunnels for all of our email communications. I just signed a contract with a company called ListKit, which is a cold email tool. We've got a database of, I don't know, it's probably about 18,000 folks that have come into our lives and gone out of our lives at one point. And so we're going to use that tool to see if we can start to create a conversation again with those folks and see if they're interested. Yeah, it's a long list. We use, we're a simple company, so we use QuickBooks for all of our companies. I've contemplated moving over to NetSuite, but I don't think we're quite big enough to do that yet. It's not worth the investment, but that's probably the direction we'll go. It's all connected in the back end. I have dashboards for everything because I don't have a lot of time. B, I have a profound case of ADD. So unless I don't stare at spreadsheets very well. I need charts and gauges and dials to be able to figure out to, spend time and keep my attention on stuff. And, I'm a visual person, so that helps me as well. So it's a lot of different things.
Well, I think what's interesting is that most people are spending the time to make sure that some of these systems and automations and processes are in place to make the best use of you and your small team's time. It's interesting because you do need to take a moment and set some of these things up to take advantage of them, and people might lose that insight when they're in the thick of doing businesses and they don't take the time or they don't make that type of time investment to get these things in place.
So I look at it from two perspectives. One is the time that I'm most valuable to my company is really when I'm working with investors and working with deal finders, folks that are bringing us deals and evaluating those deals. If I'm doing those two things 80% of the time, that's a successful day, right? So and I'm capable of doing all of the back office technology stuff. I'm just geeky enough that I can do it, but it's not a good use of my time. So I would rather we used to be a liberal user of Upwork and Fiverr. Actually, I used to work for a preceding company of Upwork called Elance for a bunch of years.
I remember Elance.
I'm a huge user of offshore resources. It's one of the things that I learned in my Silicon Valley days is how to leverage, it turns out there's really smart people outside of the US as well. And so when we're able to identify talent, we jump at the opportunity to work with those folks, start our own digital agency called Clark Street Digital, because I had so many of my friends saying, hey, you use virtual assistants for everything. And we do. I mean, our entire back office is in the Philippines. And would you teach me how to do that? I said, sure, I'll teach you how to do it. And here's how we do it. And oh, that's a lot of work. Yes, it is. But here's what I'll do for you is I'll give you access to my back office to go recruit. And that worked out really well for several friends. And so they encouraged me to start the agency. And so we did that about a month ago. And so now we provide virtual assistants and search engine optimization and digital marketing and a few other things for real estate investors.
So have you found some way to put in the guardrails so that you're not distracted from your core business?
So I do it two ways. One, I track my time fairly rigorously. I'm a time block kind of guy in terms of how I manage my calendar. And I also have an executive assistant, Janice, who is ruthless with my time. And so if she is seeing that I'm off calendar, I get a one-on-one and say, hey, your ADD's kicking in. You need to, these projects are falling behind because you skipped this meeting and this meeting. It happens. And, I value all of our team members, but Janice is somebody you might as well lop my left arm off if I ever lost her. She's about as close to a work wife as I have ever gotten. And I have a wife who's wonderful as well. And she keeps me in line too. So, but that's the way I do it.
Just to remind everybody, you can learn a little bit more about what's going on here by going to clarkstreet.com. And if you found some value in what we're talking about so far, do us a quick favor, share this with one of your investor friends. If you're watching us on YouTube, I'm going to ask you, give us a quick like and subscribe. It really goes a long way. So, Ed, what are you working on right now? You mentioned you're building this property.
Yeah.
Let's start there. You bought a house. It came with 58 acres. Was that a happy accident or was that something you
It was a happy accident. So back in 2019, we were flipping a lot of houses. We were probably flipping, I don't know, 15 or 20 houses a year, in addition to all the other stuff we were doing. And I had decided that 19 was going to be the last year we were really going to do that. We were going to be more opportunistic because I wanted to focus on growing the multifamily business. And I couldn't do both. So something had to give. And so end of 2019, we were sending out, or 17, 18, 19, we were sending out 3, 4, 5,000 postcards to our target markets each month. And the way that direct mail works, it's not an instantaneous reaction. It's typically somebody pins that to a cork board or it's on their refrigerator to remind them that, hey, when I'm ready, this is here for me, right? And so we got one of those phone calls. We had stopped our marketing probably in the fall of 19, got a phone call in January might have been February of 2020. Hey, I've got this house. My grandparents just passed, or my grandmother just passed, and I live in Texas and I don't want the house. And there's a whole bunch of issues with it, including a squatter. And I'd like to sell it. And so it happened to be 5 minutes from my office. I said, I'll tell you what, sir, let me get in the car. I'll drive by it. I'll call you back and we'll figure this out. So drive by it. It's a 1,300 square foot ranch. From a flipping perspective, ranches are very, very straightforward to fix. There's very few things they can do to a house that break it that I can't fix. My guys can't fix. And so I call the gentleman back. I say, yes, we definitely want it. We arrive at a number. It's a little more than I wanted to pay, but the inventory was even an issue back then. So I knew the market was tight and that we might be able to goose the after value a little bit to make the deal work. And so that's February of 2020. March 12th, the world ends, right? COVID. And come to find out, well, actually, in the interim, let me take a step back. So a day or two later, he calls me back and he said, hey, what do you want to do about the land? And I hadn't even looked at the plot plan. We put the P&S in place. I handed it to the attorneys in my team and on to the next one, right? I hooked them, you clean them and fry them, right? And I said, what land? And immediately I'm on the town website looking at the property card. And I was like, oh my God, there's 58 acres here. Well, okay. Yeah, we're definitely interested in the land. What do you want for it? Nothing. Like, why would you do that? And he said, because I don't want to pay taxes on it anymore. I'm tired of this being an financial albatross around my family's neck. And I just want to get rid of it. Okay. Well, we ended up working it out. He reconsidered that position after a while. And we worked out a deal where it's like, if it yielded a certain number of lots, then we would pay a certain price. And so we ended up acquiring the house and the 58 acres. But March 12th happens, COVID kicks in, the world shuts down. Turns out that he is the executor, but not the only heir. There are 9 other heirs spread out all over the country. None of them live local and none of them like each other. And so they needed a probate attorney to kind of walk them through that. And we gave them a list of local attorneys. And I think they picked one off the list, but they may have picked their own. It took 18 months for the courts to open. And in that 18 months, their attorney had herded those proverbial cats and gotten them to have conversations and at least agree upon how everything was going to get divvied up. World opens back up, 16, 18 months later. And there's an 18-month backlog in the probate court because the courts have been shut down for 18 months. I basically left it. I said, look, contract is what it is. We'll honor it in perpetuity. I know that it's only going to get better. So I'm fine with being patient. And it allayed their concerns in terms of this guy's going to get impatient and walk away. So it's right before Thanksgiving 2023, they called and said, well, we're ready. And I said, awesome. I have spent that money 3 times over since the last time, we had a substantive conversation about this. So I need 90 days to close it, but we'll get it closed. And so ended up getting that deal done. It was a complex financing because, our commercial lenders didn't like it because it's a lot of land and they don't value the land. And our private lenders understood that a little bit more. And so we broke it up into 2 phases and said, okay, phase 1 is the flip. Phase 2 is potentially multifamily, but it's a development project. You can invest in one, both, or one or the other, or both. And so we were able to work that out and we got it closed in March. And I was there today talking with our road guide to start planning to build the road and divvy up the lots. And we're going to put solar in there. And, there's going to be a solar field and a whole bunch of other stuff. And my partner, Mike, was meeting with neighbors who were basically saying, hey, we don't want anything built in our backyard. And so there's plenty of acreage. So we're working it out with them to give them, to sell them some buffer around their property so they don't have to listen to our guys swing hammers all summer. And, so hopefully it's going to work out so that everybody wins. And, the town of Haddam where I live, gets a very nice Class A rentable community that provides affordable housing for folks that normally wouldn't be able to live in a town, like this. And so it's good for everybody.
Based on your experience so far in the real estate world and your previous life in the marketing world, I'd be curious, out of your lifespan here in your career, you don't even have to restrict yourself to the real estate investing. What's been the biggest lesson you've learned that you've been able to apply and carry forward?
I think communication is really important because not everything goes to plan. In fact, pretty much every property we've acquired over the years has had some sort of curveball. And so we're very upfront about that with the folks that we work with. We have contingency plan A, B, and C for everything that we do. Sometimes we have to go figure out plan D, and that's okay too. But the most important part of it is to make sure that our investors are brought along the way. I always ask, one of the questions I ask prospective partners is, have you done this before? Have you worked with other folks? And what's been your experience with them? And a lot of them, almost all of them, I would say nearly all of them say that communication is an issue. So, and, there is the monthly newsletter, which we also do, but there's also pick up the phone and say, hey, this happened an hour ago and I need to make you aware of it. It's okay. This is what we're going to do about it. But, it's going to affect us in these three ways. And this is how we're managing that. And nothing for you to do. Just want you to be aware of it. A huge part of my job is talking with those investors about those curveballs, right?
Right. So, with all of that being said, you talked about communication is a big aspect. Going back to your marketing, it sounds like you do feel the freedom to be authentic regarding what you post there. Some people, in this case, you mentioned the California, I suppose it's the wildfires and the landlording that's going on there. Do you feel apprehensive in sharing certain things, or do you think that's part of the messaging that you set forth so that people know who you are and whether it's a good fit?
There are certain topics I won't bring up. I don't talk politics. I don't talk about, religion or anything like that. If you want to ask me about that, in a private scenario, I'll tell you exactly what I think, but I'm not there to kind of put that out to the world. But I think authenticity is really the only way you can get to know somebody, at a level that you need to know if you're going to be in business with them. And so, I'm not a young guy, right? I'm 55 and I've been doing this for a long time. And if you don't like one of my opinions, I'm okay with that. I wish you well. And if I had come across someone that is more in line with what's important to you, I will gladly introduce you. There are people that I meet all the time that want something different than we're prepared to provide. I'm very upfront with them. I said, look, we're not a good fit. And I like you. It's not a personal issue. It's just we do it this way. And this is the way we do it. And this is the way we've done it since 2011. And it works really well for us and our partners. And I understand that's not okay for you, but like we don't do side letters, right? In terms of, okay, I'm going to treat these 40 people one way, but this guy over here, for some reason is special. That's one of the things that I learned in my corporate world is, you need to operationalize your business, and you can't do that if you're trying to please all of these individual constituencies. You provide an offering, you over deliver on value, you over deliver on communication. And if it's a good fit, great, come on board. If it's not a good fit, cool. Let's keep in touch.
Well,
Okay.
I I hate to admit, sometimes I fall down the rabbit hole because we're a similar age.
Yeah.
Just being transparent there, and it's fun to watch Gen X responds type videos.
Right.
I could have clipped that out and just been a Gen X response because
Right.
it's pretty much like, if you're not okay with it, I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Right.
It's a Gen X answer.
It's the millennials, the betas, and I can't remember the other one saying, "Don't mess with Gen X." Right? Those
Mhm.
videos are hilarious. You know, they're latchkey kids. They would leave at 8 a.m. and be running through the woods until 6 p.m. and they were fine and they survived that. And so don't
Mhm.
mess. I get a chuckle out of that because I was that kid, so it's funny.
Oh, well, a lot of it rings true. I mean, it's just
Yeah,
the nature of the beast. Well, Ed, this has been a fantastic conversation. Before we go close out this episode and jump into the rapid fire, is there
sure.
any concept we should have tried to touch on here today?
The thing with marketing is you want to create awareness, but it's deeper than that because think about how you shop for a new car, for instance. Time was when you would go buy a car, you would go to the dealership. They would keep you for 4, 5, 6 hours, showing you all of the cars on their lot and the options and the various colors and all that. That doesn't happen anymore, right? What happens is you get online, you start to figure out what you like, you figure out what that costs, and you do your homework. And by the time you darken the doorstep of a dealership, you know exactly what I want. In fact, I want stock number 12345 on your lot. It's right over there. I'd like to buy that car and I want to buy it for this price. Right. And so marketing, content marketing is the same way, right? Is I want to provide as much information, and I do that through education as possible. And, because I get all the time, and I'm sure you've gotten this in your travails as well. I get the question, well, why can't I do this myself? And the answer is you can. Of course you can. In fact, buy me a cup of coffee, or hell, I'll buy you a cup of coffee and I'll ask any question you want, or I'll answer any question you want, and I'll gladly help you along the way if you want to do this yourself. So the education piece is to show them, here's everything that we do to run our business, and you're a tech executive, or you're a, pharmaceutical executive, you work 80 hours a week. And do you really have time to do all the stuff that we do to manage these properties? No, they actually require sleep and want to hang out with their families. And so the ones that, want to work with us, that is the way we do it. But we communicate that through marketing, and mostly through educational marketing. Why do you give up the missile secrets? Why do you do that? And I tell them, I'm like, I'm 13 years ahead of them. They're never going to catch me. And it's a big world out there. And if they find their deal and it's a deal that I wanted at some point, well, congratulations. When you're ready to sell it, give me a call. I'd love to buy it. But, that's typically my perspective on our approach to marketing.
Yeah. Well, I've found this is kind of a consistent thought in the real estate investing world. I haven't been in any industry where people will just freely share anything and everything.
Right.
Like, there's just this mindset in the real estate investing community where you can pretty much ask anyone anything.
There is the successful people come from a place of abundance. There's no denying it, because it's a big world out there. And, there are, in the state of Connecticut alone, there are 1,208 properties that I'd like to own someday. And so, we market to those building owners and the brokers that know them to make sure that when that property does come up for sale, that we're one of the first phone calls. If we're in the process of buying 3 of those and someone else buys one of those off the list, good for you. I wish you well.
Well, Ed, this is fantastic. I'm going to point everybody to your site, clarkstreet.com. That's CLARKST.com. That's going to be a clickable link in the show notes. But if you're ready, we'll jump into the rapid fire questions and close out this episode.
Sure, fire away.
What lie do real estate investors sometimes tell themselves?
What lie do real estate investors tell themselves? That they can figure it out. That if the numbers aren't quite matching what their model is, they'll figure it out along the way. Don't worry about it. It never works. Don't do that. That is something that I see happen all the time, is that they don't have their financial plan buttoned up to the point where it's as airtight as possible. And they think that when that curveball comes, they'll figure it out instead of planning for it. It's easier just to plan for it.
Sure. If you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would that be?
Start sooner. So somebody handed me Rich Dad, Poor Dad, a good friend of mine, in 2008. And it took me 3 years to get the courage to pull the trigger on my first deal. I wish I had started in 1995 when I really wanted to do this.
Do you have a book recommendation?
What am I reading right now? I'm reading Buy Back Your Time by Dan. Oh my goodness, it's not Sullivan.
That's Who Not How.
Yeah, it's Who Not How. No, Buy Back Martell, Dan Martell. And it's excellent. It basically gives you a roadmap. As you're building a business, here are the 15 people you're going to need along the way. When you get to this point, hire this person. When you get to that point, hire this person. And here's what you give them to do. And it's a roadmap for scaling a business. And it's something that, it's a question I get asked all the time in terms of, how do you turn a teeny tiny business into a great big business? Well, it takes a lot of different skill sets. And even you have to become, as the leader of that company, the person who is a founder isn't necessarily an operator, and isn't necessarily, there is a certain skill. One of my mentors, Rob Bernstein, always said, There's a certain skill set to be a founder. And then when you get to $1 million to grow to 10, that's a different skill set. And it can be the same person running the business, but a lot of times it's not. And then 10 to 100 million is a different person altogether. It's a different skill set, and so on and so forth. Scaling a business is not easy. And Martel's book is really good. Actually, if somebody I had on my podcast recommended it, I'm reading that as we speak, actually, I'm about halfway through it.
And finally, what strategy or tool have you implemented that has had the biggest time-saving impact to you or your business?
I would say time blocking. It's a simple concept, but it helps me get very clear on that decision tree that you go through when somebody says, "Hey, you got a minute? I want to run something by you." If it doesn't solve a couple of very specific problems or take advantage of a couple of simple, specific opportunities, specific to what are my investors dealing with and what are my property owners dealing with, I say no. And it's hard because I want to help, but time blocking and actually a maniacally disciplined executive assistant is also very helpful.
I'm sure she would appreciate you calling her maniacal.
I've called her more than that. Janice has been with us for, 6 years now, and she's basically family.
Well, one last time, clarkstreet.com. You could learn more information there, but really appreciate your time. This has been just fantastic. Thank you.
It was good to meet you too, Jack.